Right, hello everyone. Thank you very, very much for joining us to our business bites. As the chamber, we do like to keep everyone in the loop of certain topics, and the topic today is a very, very important one, which is all about cybersecurity. So, could you cope with a cyber attack? I know this is really, really important. I was just telling the others that I was watching a film the other day of the end of the world scenario. So fingers crossed we don't get to that situation, but I'm sure that these guys will be the ones that would be able to sort it all out. But yeah, really interesting topic. So today we are joined by a wonderful member, ITRM, and we've got Mike Castle and Pat Ramsden doing the presentation, and they are joined by the lovely Tilly and Louis. So welcome to you all, and I hope that you enjoyed this session today. Mike and Pat, thank you ever so much for being our presenters and helping us learn about this a little bit more. I will leave it over to you. The stage is yours, so to speak, and yeah, looking forward to your presentation. And I believe that questions will be there'll be an opportunity for questions at the end of their presentation, but if you do have any during, more than happy to keep having a look at the chat feature and can be your voice for you. So yes, over to you, Pat and Mike.
Excellent, thank you very much. Afternoon everyone. So I'm just going to do a little bit about ITRM, then we're going to actually do an analysis of a cyber attack, a real one that happened that we were involved with, just to give you an insight into some of the bits that go on. So just a couple of intros. So I'm Chief Technology Officer for ITRM. Pat is a Solutions Architect. So basically across the board, when these incidents happen, 9 times out of 10, we're involved in one form or another, be it either on the forensics, how did it happen side, or on the how do we rebuild and recover from an incident. So it just gives you a bit of an insight into the sort of things that we might be involved in. So a little bit about ITRM. So we are 25 years old. We are award-winning MSP. We've got offices in Southeast and the Southwest. So we're about 62 staff now. And we do a number of services across the managed services, cybersecurity, and advisory services, amongst others. But essentially that's us. Not going to read out the rest. You can see what we are. A few badges from our perspective, all the usuals you'd expect. So Cyber Essentials being one of the key ones. We'll talk a little bit about that in a bit. Yeah, so I'm going to speed into the detail so we don't hold up. So analysis of a cyber attack. It's probably the worst day for a business to walk in and find or actually discover it going on a bad day. We've done a number of webinars and face-to-face events where we've talked about the left and right of cyberboom. And if you look at some of our socials, you'll be able to get some of that content if you're interested. But essentially, it's the concept of things to do to avert the crisis and things to do after the crisis. And what we're going to get into today is actually somebody found it, contacted us, and we had to help them. And so what we're going to get into is some of the findings, just to sort of resonate with you, that it could be you. Whenever we talk to clients, unfortunately, we accept that you can invest in security, you can invest in training, but there is always the risk, because just as an example, a user with a senior role can have lots of systems accessed. They can be duped into believing something's real, and the attack can still happen. So it is as much about education as it is about prevention, and we're going to get into some of that information going through this. So let's get started. So the headlines of this cyber attack. It was a multi-million turnover business in the UK. They had an Irish element to their business, and obviously that has a relevance following Brexit. So we'll explain a little around that. They were 200 users, a mix of people in and out of the office. The new work styles are not everyone's in the office anymore, so you have to expect that there is that gap sometimes where people at home are a little isolated at times, and they may not ask their peer group, does this look real? Should I do this, etc. So just some of the headlines to think about. Usual systems, email, files, ERP, CRM, all the usuals. So it may resonate with your businesses, but that's the sort of environment they had. This was a mix of on-premise and cloud. Not everyone's on-prem anymore. but it's just an element of this attack that was quite significant because of the way they needed to rely on some elements of it. So what happened? The threat actors gained access to the network and looked around for about 6 days. So we saw the entry point, unfortunately, in the review, and they were in for a number of days learning things about the network and the users and essentially what was the valuable data, because they did do an exfiltration of data. They did ask for a ransom. They did then encrypt the systems. And that day was one I can remember the operations director picking up the phone and having a very bad day. The reason that the Irish element is important is because of Brexit. There are now 2 ICOs that had to be reported to. So you've literally got 2 different organisations that you're reporting against. So we did have to do a number of toing and froing to validate if it was worthwhile of an ICO contact, which it was, due to the significant amount of data that had been taken on a personal level. All of you that are aware of GDPR, there's obviously the element of things that you may not think about, but from personal data perspective, you've got your own health and personal information of your staff, but it could even be CVs of people that you've interviewed and you haven't got rid of the CVs. You're carrying lots of personal data you might not think about. So because of that, we had to go through that process. Systems were damaged through that process and they were beyond economical repair. So they had, I'll give you some headline technologies. They had NetApp storage, they had VMware virtualization, they had lots of servers, big data. They were also in the cloud, so they were in Microsoft 365. But essentially, some of their key elements were very broken. They did have cyber insurance, which was good. This was activated as soon as we were aware. In most of these cases, if you don't involve them very early, you're going to end up going down too many avenues before they pull you back. They introduced a forensics team that they wanted involved. No problem for us. We'll lead or we'll follow whichever one they want us to do. And they quarantined all of the equipment, and the forensics team then spent a number of days initially investigating. Now, obviously, with a multi-million-pound business, it doesn't stand still. So we then had to re-architect a solution into Microsoft Azure, as it was, so into the public cloud. And we did that with the forensics team's awareness and involvement so that we could get sign-off throughout that it was actually a fit-for-purpose environment that was fitting, that the insurance company would be happy with to pass, obviously, the cost of the rebuilds, etc., going on. So that's just a very quick snapshot of the headlines of the attack. I'm now going to get into just a couple of bits. So passwords is quite an important thing. People play it up, play it down. Some people will tell you, don't worry about passwords, change them irregularly. Personally, I'm of one. Complexity is everything. We'll get into a little bit around password vaults and bits that can help generate, passwords you can't remember, but actually are complex enough that are hard to break. Every layer is a layer of security in my mind. So passwords are still important. We'll show you some other bits around what the dark web may hold, and that will give you an insight into why passwords can be quite a risk. Okay, so what was the impact? A multi-million-pound business stopped for a week. 200 staff couldn't use the systems. And what we found is that because they hadn't actually tested all of their backup solution and all of their disaster recovery plan, basically not everything that they expected to be available was. So they had to then recreate some systems and some security rights, unfortunately on the fly, which wasn't great, but it took them a little while to get their heads around all of that. So the full recovery actually took 4 months over the initial impact. Their continuity plan, they'd spent time and effort building it, and it wasn't relevant to this kind of impact and this the seriousness of the issue, which is all parts of the business were reliant on the IT system to drive the process. And really what came out is they didn't understand, if the technology wasn't there to tell them what to do, what to do. And also, because we were rebuilding systems, they needed to create the data that they were going to use in the interim period in a format that we could easily consume back into the systems. Otherwise, you've got a gap in your data, which might be financial, might be operational, but there's an impact to that. So we really needed to actually understand how to create the data in a format that we could then get back into the systems. They had an internal IT team, and they were out of their depth. It was a bit of a rabbit in the headlights moment to find that all the things you think were really good and you'd focused your time and effort on were all okay. And really, in the reality of it all, they were quite concerned by what they thought was good and wasn't, had been breached quite easily. And so we came in and we led the recovery while the forensics from the cyber insurers carried on with their investigation as to how the entry point had been discovered, what they'd done, what they'd taken, what the impact of the data was. Okay, so we're going to go into a few bits that were observations throughout the process. So I'm going to hand over to Pat at this point.
Cool. Thanks, Mike. So first of all, just talk a bit about the IT environment that this customer faced and why this led them to ultimately being breached. So the first part is lifecycle management. So their management of their core technologies, it just wasn't working. They had old devices or devices that they knew were no longer receiving updates from the vendor. And some of these were publicly accessible, meaning that they're an attacker's dream, essentially, because these vulnerabilities are known, an attacker finds out about them, and if you can't patch them, well, they're just open in there for people to attack. Moving on from that, patch management. So again, this moves on from that. If you have devices and services that are supported, are they updated? We're all very familiar with that Windows update that we get once a month of please restart your computer to complete installing updates. But that's just such a small part of your services and systems. So is your Google Chrome up to date? Or is your Wi-Fi up to date? Your network up to date? Are your backup devices up to date and functioning correctly? These are all questions that you should be asking as an IT consumer to either your internal IT teams or your internal or your providers to ensure these things are being managed up to date and that you're as secure as you can be. Moving on, multi-factor authentication, MFA. In this instance, it was only enabled for administrators. So those with extra access rights were being requested for it. However, the general populace were not actually required to use MFA at that time. It'd been a planned project, but not started. That's dangerous because if, for example, you may have a lot of sensitive email data in your emails, well, as an attacker, if I can just brute force your password and get into that, I can then take that data straight out of your mailbox or other services. We'll talk more about that later because these credentials are very easy to find on the dark web. So once you've got those once, you're susceptible to risk. And that doesn't mean it's your business credentials. For example, who uses the same password for their LinkedIn as they do for their business email? As soon as that first password is lost or discovered on the internet, the attackers are going to try that in every system they can think of. The next part is the environment review. So services that you purchase, such as your antivirus or endpoint detection software, so also known as EDR, or other services, are constantly being evolved. Gone are the days where you buy a product and then you have to buy a new version every year. It's now moved to that subscription model where new features are drip fed to you over the course of a year or two or three and the likes. One of the downs, that's a brilliant to you as a consumer because you're always making sure you get the latest and greatest. The downside of that is quite often these vendors are not turning on this new functionality for you because they don't understand the risk that that may cause to your business. It could have an unknown side effect. So it's really important that your environments are reviewed and you're making sure you're getting the best value out of these services and turning on these new features. A prime example is a few years ago, Sophos released a new function for their antivirus that was to block ransomware. Now, that wasn't turned on by default unless you went in there and turned that on. Well, I'm sure it doesn't take too much explaining what the impact of not having that switched on could be. User awareness and discipline. I think, as Mike said earlier, the user is always the weak link. We can protect them as much as possible, but especially with remote users, they don't have that person to look next to them and say, "Oh, have you seen this email? Does this look right to you?" With that human interaction disappearing or not as frequent as it used to be when everyone was in the office, users are more likely to click links themselves and actually be that weak point. So it really is important to make sure your users are trained. And finally, the password policy. As Mike says, there are some schools of thoughts where you shouldn't change passwords anymore. However, that assumes you have a very well-trained set of staff and multi-factor authentication in place across all systems. It's actually better to have that long, secure password and probably change it frequently, because that means if it is ever discovered on the dark web, you can then actually understand where that password is used and also change it. So if it's discovered a year ago, that password is no longer valid and basically useless to people. So that's sort of a bit about the IT environment that was attacked here. So moving on, what are the key takeaways? And the tip of the day is to two-factor authentication for everything. That's taking what you know, your password, and then having something on you, such as your phone, where you press that approve button. Chances are a malicious attacker is not going to have your phone. So that will protect you in a lot of scenarios. So it really is important to have that. And I'm sure any of you who, well, I think everyone nowadays online banks, it's a non-negotiable with online banking. Why should we treat our businesses any differently? Moving on from that, it's observations and entry methods and other issues we found during the recovery. So this is once we had began the recovery or completed the recovery, we had our lessons learned afterwards and found what we could do better in the future or what could be done better in the future. So staff and they use their business email addresses and passwords in other systems. So for example, LinkedIn, they're using their same password for LinkedIn as they are for their business email. That could be other things as well. Amazon, for example, or X, or formerly known as Twitter, they had a big data breach not too long back when lots of passwords were lost. I think, was it TfL recently had their cyber breach and they lost some data as well. So if you're using that same email address and password in there as you're using in your business systems, that's going to be the first thing that someone tries to attack you with. So it really is important to be using unique passwords across the board. Complacency. So it's very easy for an IT team to think, I've got this, it's all under wraps, we're secure. Actually, we should be assuming we're never secure. Let's always try and we're always on the back foot as the protectors, because we can't protect what we don't know exists. So you're always going to be on the back foot. So it really is important that you train your users and to actually know how to spot these attacks and phishing attempts, but also keep them up to date. The attacks change over time. I got one the other day as a text message, actually. It was a completely new one, which was a DVLA, your car, you haven't paid your fixed penalty notice, we're going to stop your car being allowed to drive. Some people will fall for that. They may think, actually, I should probably click that link and go and fill some information. And then all of a sudden, you've given away lots of information about yourself. So it really is important to train people on that. Another piece of that is QR codes. How many of us during COVID went to Tesco's and scanned the QR code on the way in? Well, actually, how difficult is it to stick your own QR code over and above that and build a page on the web that looks like that and steal people's data? So it's really important to teach people what to look out for.
Just to cover another bit. So you may hear in the news about supply chain attack. So really that's something that we see more of, and that point there about known and unknown sources. If the contact is known to you and they're sharing something that may look real, it's when your users have to have the discipline to know, is it right? Does it look real? And they have to challenge and question things that, unfortunately, with the distributed sort of hybrid workforce we find ourselves, there's no one sitting left and right of them to say, what do you think of this? So what we've seen is a bit of a discipline issue where they'll go, oh, it must be real because I know the person. But really, that's because they may have been breached and they're using that environment to attack you. If they breach you, you will be used to attack somebody else. That's what they talk about, this supply chain attack, which is how the NHS got impacted a little while ago. So it is important, and this whole knowledge piece around users' awareness is quite key.
Thanks, Mike. So moving on from that, appliances. So these are, in the instance we found, they had a VPN appliance into their network, so users could remotely work. This was actually end of life and 2 patch versions behind the latest version that was from the vendor. So what that meant was there was a whole host of known attack vectors to the bad actors that they could use to attack this. So because they know it's actually pretty trivial to get in, we haven't patched, so we haven't put the protections in place. Also, the firewalls were nearing end of life and sharing the same credentials as the remote access appliances. So that means once we've got one device, it's very easy for us to move over to the next device and then move around that network and find lots of information. And lastly, IT documentation. It was a small IT team. I think it was a team of two, and between the two of them, they knew everything they needed to know about their network. Now, all of a sudden, as Mike said, it was a deer in the headlights moment, and all of a sudden they needed help. But how do we help when we don't know what we're trying to help fix? It takes longer. We can certainly do it, but everything takes that bit longer because the documentation isn't up to date or doesn't exist, and you're relying on piecemealing things together from things you found, or every time you need to understand something, you have to go and ask the question, which just delays that recovery. So having documentation about your IT and your services is so important. Even having the list of all who your vendors are, their contact details and your account numbers will get you a long way. So they were sort of the top 4 findings of this cyber attack. I mean, we'll have a Q&A session at the end, so I'm happy for any questions to be asked. But that was that one. Moving on, just thought I'd share some cybersecurity statistics from 2024. So some of these actually scared me when I was researching them. So 50% of businesses in the UK have been a victim of a cybercrime. That's a scary number, if you ask me. That's well, half of us here, essentially. But of those 50% of the businesses that have been victim, 84% of the attacks started with a phishing email. So a dodgy email from someone you don't know, or someone you do know, as Mike mentioned, the supply chain attack, sending you a file that isn't quite right and then being opened. And then 69% of businesses do not have a continuity plan. I'm not going to read these all out, but again, this is that if you are a victim to a cyber attack, you really want to make sure you know you can function in the event of a disaster. I'm not going to read them all out because you can all read, but I think the other part one is that £28,000 is the average cost to recover from a cyber attack. Now that's just the recovery. That doesn't take into account any loss of earnings, loss of reputation, inability to function or work during that attack. So actually that number could be far greater. So that bit of investment into your cybersecurity now will be a big benefit to you in the long run. So moving on, just talk about some of the ways you can protect yourself. So this, I do apologise, this slide does get a bit crazy. We call it the Kaplunk slide, but it just shows you some of the products out there and how they relate to your environment and how they protect you. I'm going to talk about a couple. Mike will talk about a couple, but if there is any further information you want on these, contact hello@itrm.co.uk. That'll be on the last slide, and we're more than happy to have discussions with you and help you where we can. So I'm just going to pick a few of these to talk about. The first one is at the top right, which is that endpoint detection with or without MDR. So a lot of you know of the concept of antivirus. We've all had it in the past. We've had McAfee's, our Symantec's. They're very much like that bouncer at the door of a nightclub. They have a list of people who can't come in or can come in. And if you're on that list, you're in. If you're not on that list, you're out. It's very black and white. You can get in or out. EDR takes that a step further and is actually looking at behaviours. Oh, this person on the list, but he's a bit drunk and stumbling around. Probably I don't want him in the club. Let's kick him out. We know about his behaviour or her behaviour. So it's taking that analysis that step further and actually being able to understand that. And you can add on to that with what's known as an MDR, which is a managed detection and response, which actually gives you a round-the-clock security team watching for those alerts and those behaviours, acting on them on your behalf. The world isn't a 9-to-5 workplace anymore. Security shouldn't be 9 to 5 either. Some of the others I'd like to pick up on are email security. So actually, let's try and strengthen our gates as much as possible. As I mentioned earlier, 84% of attacks were because of a phishing attack. Well, actually, let's strengthen our email security with either Microsoft or third-party products and block more of those attacks before they can even get in. If they do get in, let's add some web browsing security, for example. So you click on a link, actually let's do some extra checks on that link you're clicking. Let's check that page in real time to make sure it's secure and is what you expect. Because if it has got in, let's make sure whatever you do with it is safe. Security has to be a multi-tiered approach. It's not a one solution. It fixes everything. The last one before I hand it back over to Mike, I'd like to mention is about Cyber Essentials. So I don't know how many people here know of Cyber Essentials. However, that is the government sort of issued standard that they expect all businesses to, sort of cyber security standard that they expect all businesses in the UK to be able to adhere to. Now, it's not a mandatory thing, but the government has said this is the minimum baseline we expect. It's brilliant to go through that, and that will test your EDR or endpoint protection product. That will test your email security and your web security, and a bunch of other services as well, such as are you practicing good password hygiene and the likes. So it really does give you that bit of paper to say, I am meeting that government standard. So if you do have customers that you're holding personal or sensitive data on, it really shows them you're committed to your security. There's also a Cyber Essentials Plus, which takes that a step further, and you actually have an external auditor to come in and perform checks on your devices. And as I say, if you do handle any sensitive data, that really is a must-have, as it really shows to your customers your commitment to their security. Over to you, Mike.
Thank you. You may be aware of the term zero trust. So we have a number of products that we use to create a zero trust environment, which means the device can only access the minimum level. The user can only access the minimum level, what they need for their role. So as an example, the apps denied by default means that rather than allowing a user to run anything they like, potentially, we only control the apps. So once we've snapshot what the apps are, we don't allow any more without actually approving them in a profile. That profile then allows all of the devices or a subset of them to run a new app. Another part of that is if you imagine Microsoft have an administration function and tool called PowerShell. It's a great way to manipulate settings of Windows devices, but it can actually manipulate their cloud platform, their Microsoft 365 SaaS products. And unfortunately for a Windows 10 and 11 machine, it actually runs in a user context, which means a standard user can run it. So in an attack, that's exactly where some of the attackers go, and they use PowerShell to basically look at what they can affect. And what we can do with our product stack is we can actually block everybody from running PowerShell and enabling it on a needs basis, which reduces the risk of that being used to infiltrate and exploit some of your devices. Another one we've got, vulnerability management risk assessment. This is another key area. Depending on how you patch, if you just use the Microsoft tool, pretty much you're patching Microsoft products only. Unfortunately, what happens with any patch, regardless of the vendor, if you haven't put that patch on, the threat actors or bad actors, however you know of them, basically they will look at what that patch is fixing and then exploit it when it's not in place. So essentially, whether that's Microsoft, and if you look at, if you were running older server versions that are no longer supported, 2008, 2012 R2, they're the sort of things that then get affected by these patches, but apps are exactly the same. Adobe, they are all out there. Google Chrome, they can all be breached if you're not patching them up to date. Now, some of them are automatic, but sometimes they fail. So vulnerability management allows us to scan a machine and get current vendor level and your current machine level and compare and contrast to know if there is a risk. If there's something to fix, if there's a gap in your security posture, we'll find it with vulnerability management. The risk assessment piece goes a stage further, and essentially dark web, all right, you may have heard the term dark web scanning. When your credentials are lost, they're normally for sale on the dark web, because either it's for somebody to buy the attack or somebody to buy the data and then use it to leverage a payment, is essentially what it's for. So we use dark web scanning as a bit of an early warning system that if your credentials appear on the dark web, we can start to do password management, we can start to lock down systems, reduce the overall external footprint of your view. That means actually if there is an attack coming, we've reduced the potential impact of it as quickly as possible. So we're going to take you through a little bit of that. I think I'll go back to Pat and we'll just take you through what a risk assessment report will show you, particularly about what the dark web may know. Okay.
Cool, thanks, Mike. So yeah, so we talk about the risk assessment. So if you have shared your information with us and your email addresses with us, you will receive one of these via email later on. Tilly, our marketing manager, will send those out. But essentially, this is an example, a screenshot of WH Smith. Obviously, we've 5 lines and we've redacted the data. But as you can see, this Mr. 2 Jeff person is using the same password on several areas of the internet. And we can see that. We can see his first 3 characters are HOO. Now, there is the ability, that means that data is out there on the internet, and what's the betting he's using that same password somewhere else. So there's nothing to stop me then going out somewhere else and saying, well, let's try his LinkedIn or his WH Smith's account and see if we can breach him. Obviously, these are back from 2017 and 18 and 19, so I'd like to think he's changed his passwords by now. However, it does show you that data is out there. And the reports we generate are purposely masqueraded because we don't want to know your passwords, but they are out there in clear text. You'll notice at the top of that list, there's a 1782.mgr user, and that data is that's encrypted. What that means is that data exists on the internet, but nobody's purchased it yet, so we can't see it, but the data is out there. Someone's got it. You should make an action upon that. If you don't receive a risk report after this, let us know by contacting us as hello@ITRM, and we'll get that one sent out to you. Again, that email address will be on the last slide. With any luck, you'll get one of these saying that your data is safe and has not been found on the dark web. However, I think out of the 50, 60 of these I run, I think I can count maybe 1 or 2 that have looked like this. It's a very rare scenario.
It is.
So please don't be shocked if your data is out there. However, do look at that information and see if you recognise you're still using that password somewhere, and please do update that and change that. Sorry, thank you. So again, here's some further information. We've redacted a lot of the information, but as you can see, there's some very common themes here. So if we look at the first 8 or 9 lines, that's the same person using a password that starts with car on multiple websites across multiple years. And we can see they're using that password in 2018 and they're still using it in 2023. That's the sort of hygiene we need to train users to not be doing, and using unique passwords on different sites. That's where services like password vaults, you may have heard of services such as Keeper or LastPass, that's where they really come into their own, because you have to remember one password and that will remember the rest for you. Be you on your mobile phone, your laptop, a desktop, a tablet, that will be able to work with you across all locations and help you stay secure. And lastly, you'll also get a bit of information about your domain, and if you have what's known as SPF and DMARC. So I won't go into too much detail of what these are, but SPF essentially says this is where I will send my emails from. So think of it like a postmarker. You every time you send a letter, it gets postmarked. Well, actually, my person receiving these should know I will only ever send from these locations. And DMARC then says, actually, you've received an email from me from a different location. What should I do with that? Should I reject it? Should I quarantine it? So that's why they're really important to have. And a few months ago, Google and Yahoo made some big changes to the system. And if you tried to email them without these in place, they're basically going to get rejected. So if you did have any email issues a few months ago with those, it'll be because you didn't have these records in place and correctly configured. So it really is important that you have these. It does really protect your online identity. Cool. And I'll hand back over to Mike now. Thanks.
Okay, so taking this a little bit above the technologies for a second, as we talk about, people are sometimes the weakest link. So is your business process. What we find is that you're very reliant on technology, and when it's not there, it can be quite disastrous for a business. Not all businesses survive a cyber attack. Sometimes they can't recover quick enough to generate the revenues that they need to stay operational. And so really what we do is we have a workshop process that takes you a tabletop exercise. We take you and your business managers and team leaders through a real scenario, and we basically train how to look at it differently. As an example, we had a ransomware attack where there was actually ransom encryption going on of a file server, and somebody in the business spotted it, but their manager was in a meeting. So they waited for that meeting to finish, which then ransomware encryption is not a hit the button and everything's encrypted. It is a ripple effect, and it's continually working until it's done everything. That wasted 2 hours of their time and made the impact quite a lot more significant. So what we have to do is train absolutely how to spot it, how to report it, how to treat it differently, because even your support team may look at it as a support incident, and they may not get to you for an hour or two. And in some of these security incidents, it's quite a significant impact to wait that long. So the Table 12 exercise is there to look at all of the early warning signs and how to respond, but also your business process. How do you do what you do? How do you put it into a format that is then put back into a system that's then being recovered? And actually, how does it get you ready for it? Because your business may not survive some of these attacks. It is that bad. If you have no data, your reputation is damaged, publicly, there is a lot of potential impact. And so this process that we take you through is to educate, do a bit of a gap analysis, find out what's wrong, help you cover that, and then take you through a different scenario and prove if it works or not. So that's really what we do. That's one of the exercises that we'll take customers through. Something that I would honestly urge you to think about. If you don't have a cyber incident response plan, get one. It really is that important these days. All right. So really, that's all from us. We're going to stop throwing things at you now and turn it the other way around. So over for questions now. If anyone's got any, more than willing to answer.
No questions.
So
Yeah, if anyone finds that they do have a question in future, then please make sure that you can either contact myself, us at the chamber, or I'm sure that Pat and Mike will welcome any queries that they get as well. So yes, so last of all, anyone got any questions whatsoever?
Yeah, that was an excellent presentation, chaps. Obviously in the same business as you guys. I would be very keen to have a look at that recording of the webinar if that is made available.
Yes, so you mean this particular presentation, yes. Gary? Yes, yeah. This will be recorded and put on the website. So yeah, it probably be on there from tomorrow, and you'll be able to watch it again. So it'll be on there for some time.
Okay, excellent. Okay, well, I've bumped into you guys at various events, but that's a very slightly more mature-led presentation than I have seen previously. So excellent. Thank you very much indeed.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Gary. Any more questions from anybody?
If there are any questions, obviously contact us and we'll always tell you we'll create a document of questions and answers and we'll distribute that to everyone if there is anything. So no problem at all.
Lovely. Well, Pat and Mike, that was such an informative presentation. Thank you ever so much. Again, very interesting, and I love the way that you presented it. Your busy visuals, it was brilliant, getting us all captivated, definitely. And let's hope that we won't be any attacker's dream, and they can't find us on the dark web. So I think that yeah, you really made sure that we go back, rethink everything, and make sure that we're all set and ready and prepared, really, because we don't want anything like the scenario that you explained happening. But no, round of applause for you guys. Thank you ever so much. To everyone else, I hope you have a wonderful forward week. Please go on our website from tomorrow. We should have the recording on there. You've got the email for ITRM there if you do need to contact them. If not, then contact myself. I'm more than happy to pass on any queries to Pat and Mike there. But yes, looking forward to seeing you all soon, and keep an eye on the events page for more business bites. But thank you ever so much, guys. Thank you.